Last December, I came across a color study challenge in a Discord server. I've always been more into just drawing, usually drawing from real life, photos, and the like. When I decided I wanted to start making original stuff, I believed my biggest obstacle to be coloring, so I decided to join it. Even though the number of studies I made was few, I learned a lot of stuff and wasted a lot of time. Here, I'll give a quick rundown on my studies and recount my thoughts about them, such as what I learned. Was what I learned really that important? Am I dumb? My goal was to finally do one of those studies where you color the same thing differently multiple times, like a room in different times of the day. I was really hesitant to attempt it. I had never done anything by myself. I had painted, but only from reference. I also wanted the subject to be reference-free as well. So I spent a lot of days just staying in my comfort zone and doing copy studies. I used different rendering methods, different brushes, different colors, only to be deceiving myself. My goal was to learn how to color original stuff, and here I was, practicing anything but that. It took me a long while to get over my anxiety, but the added sense of accountability I felt about being in a challenge helped me push through. I was still too scared, so I tried to start with something in between and easy. I got one of those vase and fruit photos, and I changed the subject to a Brawl Stars character. I tried out the colors on balls first, used multiply layers to make a color reference, then painted. There was one thing I forgot, another layer of even darker shadows. This made the study look flat. One big mistake that caused it was not figuring out the shadows on grayscale before everything. After this came the next batch of practices. Same piece colored 9 times. At first, I had a different idea for this practice, but I procrastinated again. I also struggled to find references. It wasn't until I was checking the few Discord servers I was in that I saw someone on KSM's server link a post from Kran's Kushart. I sat down, stared at it, and decided to yoink the references. I thought it would be the best to do that for 2 reasons. 1. I can just get started with it instead of having to look for references for months to trade and giving up at the end. Shame at the amount of time I wasted. 2. I can compare my studies to their studies. I wasn't sure what the object was going to be, so I struggled and procrastinated with this for a few more days. Not learning from my mistakes, I wanted it to be something original again. This was a bad idea as it was proven to be later on. I even tried going back to my trusty ray again. Making it original still did not work. I humbled myself and yoinked yet again. I simply redrew the pose on the reference sheet. The reason I chose to start with the red lighting was because it was the most artificial one, that was one where I could mess up more freely without having it be so obvious. I wanted to keep the layers clean and separated so that I could use them for the others, but it didn't take me too long to realize that I didn't know just exactly how to do that. So while I used a bunch of layer modes, I did not keep the shadow light layers clean nor separated. I also used smudge a lot. It was hard for me to figure out where the light hit and how it would work with the fabric. After figuring out the shadow placements with grayscale multiply layers, I made a colored multiply layer to get the whole thing looking like the reference. I did not use one single color to achieve that. Using the same red everywhere didn't work perfectly, so I used a purple color for the lighter parts of the shadow, such as his skin and hair. With all of this practice, I used masks of the silhouette, shadows, and the like. Only adding shadow layers was not enough. I realized this when I had to add a normal layer on top for the highlights painted with bright red. This worked easily because the light was only hitting the jacket. Unexpectedly, the background took a lot of time too. I had to try out a bunch of texture brushes. The second piece was the same color reference with a different lighting. By this point, I had to first figure out the shadows by painting on grayscale. With the second piece, I managed to clean up the shadows and made them look more like cel shading. For the lights, I still needed to add a light red layer. though this time on a soft light mode, and a warm light color on overlay mode to make it contrast even more. I also had fewer gray multiply layers for the shadows, basically one. I duplicated the purple part of the color's multiply layer, which covers the same area as shadows. I slightly smudged into some parts of the shadows, while for some parts I only painted more reds into the purples on the colored multiply layer. And with this, it was done. The second time was easier because I had already figured out which colors to use. I got to take my time cleaning stuff as I wasn't frustrated with everything overwhelming me. I also added a normal layer on top. I brushed subtle ambient reflections with a purple color. Not sure if I did the best job at it or if they made sense at all, but I think the addition made the piece look better. The last one of these was fairly simple. Not only did it take way less than others, I also spent a huge chunk of time on the background just trying out stuff and having fun blending. I now realize that I apparently erased some parts of the shadow and forgot to notice or fix it. For this one, the blue-purple ambient reflection layer was more intense. I also added a secondary red reflection. No logic here, I just tried it and decided to keep it. For the color 2, I actually started with shadow B because I hadn't cleaned the layers of shadow A and I was hesitant to do so. A big part of it was figuring out which colors will achieve the same colors as the reference, then incorporating them into the layers I used for the color 1. You might realize that the lights aren't as sharp as the reference. This is because I wasn't sure how to handle it. With the shadow A, I tried to approach it slightly differently, but it's still not the best. This time the colored multiply layer I used was way more muted. I used yellow for the lights and purple for the shadows. I'm not sure if this was the best choice. When I separate the layers like this, the first one looks better to me, but the second one is obviously more akin to the reference. I had 2 shadow layers, one warm reddish gray, one cold purple gray. On the purple one, I slightly went over the border with a saturated pink to achieve the effect we see in most art, and on top, I used a soft blue layer for the reflection. It seems that I started using that as a cheat code of sorts. The background was fun too. I actually forgot the brush I used for the white flying stuff, but I spent a lot of time searching and found it again. After I was finished with this one, I felt ready to do shadow A. I cleaned up the shadows referencing the earlier piece. Then I used the same colors I used for the B2 piece and copied everything such as the colors and the amount of layers. As you can see here, the layers are basically the same but edited into its own distinct shadow placement. One thing I did different here was adding a secondary color mode layer for where shadows and lights meet. This isn't a really noticeable difference, but I added it because the overlay light layer covered a major part of it. Remember how I said the lights weren't as sharp as the reference? This time I tried fixing it, but I added a gradient which made it look muddy and ugly. I was told that the sharper lights were better, and I agree, but I feel like it looked very low effort. I went back and tried fixing it while writing this. I've always had a problem with making things more flat and have less contrast. So this is definitely something I should practice further. At the end, I changed the background to fit the shadows. Shadow C was the easiest one again. I did minor modifications to the background of shadow B while mostly keeping everything the same. It only took around 15 minutes because I already had the shadow layers prepared and the colors figured out. So I just eye-drop colors and polish everything a bit more at the end. For the color 3, I felt that the green one used in the original practice was too similar to the red one, as they both had unnatural strong colored light sources. I wanted to choose a color reference that was still natural but also distinctly different from the sunset reference. So I went on a Pinterest hunt. I gravitated towards blue references, decided on this one at the end. I was really, and I mean really confused as to what to do now that I was left with no guide. I tried to use blues for the shadows, but it looked so ugly. I tried multiple colors and layer modes. None worked as needed. So I took things easy and tried out some layer modes on both to see if I could replicate the lights and shadows with just one color. I don't know why I used purple black for the ball. His suit is grey. It is clear that by this point I was getting lost in all of it and forgetting about important parts. The fact that I forgot his suit was grey, not black, created even more confusion for me, and I did not even realize just exactly why I was so confused up until now. In the end, I decided to use the master method of fuck around and find out. I used a bunch of different layer modes which I haven't used before at all, such as color burn, luminosity, soft light, linear light, and saturation. I still have no idea what exactly they do, but they work good enough. For the base shadows, I used a lighter color with the slightest bit of purple as a multiply layer, and a secondary one with both the shadow areas and light areas colored. This time, similar to the sunset one, I used a light yellow color for the light parts while keeping the same barely purple color for the shadows. For the first time ever, I used a color burn layer. I used it for the shadows with a muddy blue color at 66% opacity. I also duplicated this layer but only for the shadows on his head. The same bright yellow I used for the multiply layer was also used to make the lights, this time on a luminosity layer. For the color 3 pieces, I had 2 different reflections. One is just a light color, while one is a vibrant blue. The light color was on a soft light layer at 50% opacity, and the vibrant blue is achieved with a mid-value blue color on a linear light layer. Gradients where lights and shadows meet are blue with color 3, unlike the warm colors on the previous ones. To make the contrast even more, I added a faint overlay light layer covering the light areas. The shadow on his face was too intense. I fixed it manually by just painting on a normal layer. Then the shadow was too cold looking, so I added a light pink layer covering the light parts on saturation mode. I was confused with the background. I wasn't sure about making it gloss, fearing that the light source might not make sense. I know the sunset one is also basically gloss too, but I'm not sure. The backgrounds on these ones are all basically lackluster. For shadow A, it seems that I kept some gray shadow multiply layers in. I probably forgot to turn them off. Again, by this point I was getting really exhausted with everything and making such easy mistakes. But they helped create the contrast it needed desperately, so I think it is at the least fine. The rest is pretty much just eye-dropping colors onto the shadow layers I prepared beforehand. The reflection layer is now more of a mid-value purple color on soft light layer, which made it way less intense. I tried to make the sharp light better this time, but it's still bad looking. I was really confused about that part because I feel like a suit wouldn't reflect that much, but it doesn't look right without sharp light. Shadow C is the easiest one as always. It's the same old eye-dropping. I was too tired and uninterested that the layers are all messed up on this one. I added some white reflections on his face too. I tried editing the prior red background to a blue color, but I did the worst job at it. Most of the 20 minutes I spent on this one was spent on fixing the background. I forgot which halftone brushes I used, so it's not like I could repaint it.
And with C3 finished,
I was done. Finally free. I tried really hard to finish it before New Year's, but I wasn't all that satisfied. I was satisfied with the results. What I wasn't satisfied with was the fact that my assumption was incorrect. Since I have always only drawn, I believed my inability to finish original pieces was because I didn't know how to color. This taught me that there are multiple ways to cheat your way into good, rather decent coloring. My inability to finish original pieces was because I wasn't fluent with values, perspective, form, and shape design. Going forward, I will be focusing on those subjects. It took me a while to make this video, and last week I was recommended
Animation, Studying Light and Shade by Sirloin Burgers.
To keep it short, it's this study but as an animation. It was so well done and inspired me a lot. In the future, I'd like to try to study as animations too, just like they had done.